day for us. We've got a lot going on. There's a lot going on in the news, not the least of which is this. And so my job is very easy. I have a few housekeeping notes before I turn it over to my boss, Peter Grauer. This is a little bit different in the sense that this is going to be carried live on Bloomberg television. So, for that reason, turn off your cell phones, please. You don't want to be that guy or that woman whose cell phone rings in the middle of a Bloomberg International Television interview. So what you're going to see is John Micklethwaite and Madame Lagarde will sit right here. They'll have a conversation for about half an hour, 35 minutes, and then we'll turn it over to you to ask questions from the audience. There'll be mic runners, and John will call on people from the stage. So, again, so happy you're here. If you want to tweet, we do encourage that. The hashtag is enterprisingwomen. And of course, at Bloomberg, we appreciate. So, with that out of the way, welcome again. And I'm going to turn it over to Peter Grauer, the chairman of Bloomberg.
Okay, this, as you all know, is a great, great honor. I am, as Jason said, Peter Grauer, the chairman of Bloomberg, and thank you all for being here today. I also want to thank the Bloomberg team for helping to organize our Enterprising Women series and this fantastic event, and particularly my good colleague and friend, Maureen Maguire. It is, as you all know, an absolute honor to be introducing one of the most important players on the world stage today, Christine Lagarde. Madame Lagarde was the first female chairman of Baker McKinsey, one of the world's largest law firms. She was France's first female finance minister, the first woman to run the financial portfolio of any G8 nation, and of course, the first woman to lead the International Monetary Fund. But besides her trailblazing resume, Madame Lagarde has been a tireless, I underscore tireless, advocate for diversity and inclusion initiatives, especially in the area of gender equality. She has said that greater participation by women in the workforce is not merely a moral imperative, but as we have argued forcefully at Bloomberg, it's an economic no-brainer. Earlier this year, we were incredibly proud to launch the Bloomberg Financial Services Gender Equality Index, a social index that benchmarks gender equality in the financial services industry. Bloomberg designed the BFGEI not just to showcase firms that have made strong commitments to gender equality, but equally because we believe, like Madame Lagarde, that greater diversity and inclusion will lead to better economic outcomes. I'm very much looking forward to hearing her share her views on women in the global economy, as well as the impact on the recent U.S. election. Will you please join me in welcoming Christine Lagarde and our Bloomberg News Editor-in-Chief, John Micklethwaite.
Christine Lagarde, thank you for talking to Bloomberg. Let's begin with the theme of this event, which is Women in Power. And there are kind of two meanings of that. One is women in power like yourself, or Hillary Clinton, or Angela Merkel, or Hillary Clinton almost. And the second is women in power all the way across the world. And you know the statistics better than I do. You have the McKinsey report saying that you could increase global GDP by 28 trillion, maybe by 12 trillion if you may alter a bit for regions. There's a huge gain to be had there. You've talked about it being the great economic no-brainer. So why hasn't it happened?
That's the trillion-dollar question, actually. Because when we look at what is needed for everyone, we tend to say that we want more growth. We tend to say that we want more diversification of the economies, so that they don't rely on one single source of resources. We tend to say that we want less inequality because we are now really demonstrating that excessive inequality are a source of instability and are not conducive to sustainability of growth. So if you park just those three buckets, more growth, less inequality, more diversification, including women in the economy addresses those three issues. It increases growth significantly, and you know the numbers, you have them as well, and many in the room have them. You can increase US GDP by 5%, but you can increase Indian GDP by 27%. If you look at diversification, we have now documented evidence of the fact that when women participate in the economy and in the labor market as much as men do, you have a more diversified economy. And by bringing women to the labor market, giving them access to finance, you reduce the inequality. And we've really now documented extensively at the IMF that you can actually reduce the Gini coefficient by 10 points if you have women participation in the labor market at the same level as men. So, and we can talk about the corporate world later on, but it's just completely obvious, which is why I've said that it's an economic no-brainer. Yet it is happening very, very gradually. And it's only happening a little bit faster when there are quotas, incentives, in order to push women into both the labor market, access to finance, circles of decision makers, parliaments. When you look at the number of women in parliaments around the world, it's about 20%. And it should happen. So we have to ask, why is it not happening as you just did? What is preventing women from achieving what they can achieve?
Do you think it's something to do with the leaders? I mean, just to give you an example, you've got President Abe. He's been in Japan. He's been trying to do stuff. Not much has happened. Or even look at Barack Obama. Some people in this room might feel that he did do something by pushing money towards low-income workers and things like that. But in terms of diversity of his cabinet, in terms of doing things specifically to help women, it would be hard to claim he did a lot.
You know, I think that there is somehow, I'm a very optimistic person by nature, but I think that I see, and I hope this will last, some momentum in that field. When I was at the last UN General Assembly, a few blocks from here, the UN Secretary General said, "I am a feminist." Justin Trudeau said, "I am a feminist." The Prime Minister of Jamaica, who's heading that group, says, "I am a feminist." Great. Now, I think it is up to us, women and men who have vested joint interest in this, turning to them and saying, you are the leaders in your respective countries. You form the leadership of the world. Show us how you're going to be feminist and who you're going to hire, who you're going to promote, what policy measures you will have in place, whether your infrastructure programs are going to focus on what is actually helpful for women in order to limit and eradicate, hopefully, violence against women, how you're going to put in place inclusive finance so that women are not the victims of the middleman, the violence that is, eventually in developing countries gets into the way of them being economic actors. How are the 90% of the countries going to demonstrate that they eliminate the legal discriminations that are embedded in their constitution or in their legal system? That, it came to me as a huge surprise. 90%. Can you believe 90% of the countries of the world have in their legal system a provision or an article in the constitution that is actually a discrimination against women? So there's plenty to be done for those in leadership who can demonstrate that they are feminist. Okay, that's great.
Sure, just use Barack Obama as an example. I'm sure he would have also said he was a feminist. We've had 8 years of...
He actually did.
You've had 8 years of him, and yes, you've had more pay for low-income workers, and you've had some degree of equality stuff in terms of pay within companies, but it would be hard to claim that he has pushed the cause of women forward, wouldn't it?
Maybe there are a few things that he would have liked to do and has not been able to do for some reason. But, I wish, particularly in this country, there was a serious parental leave. It's one of the few countries in the world where it doesn't exist, except in great companies like, I'm sure, Bloomberg.
We've done, yes. We can come back to the issue of Donald Trump and parental leave, because I think that's very interesting. But it strikes me at the moment there's two sort of arguments for how to change the role of women in the economy. One is that we need more diversity programs, those sort of things. But on the other hand, the main effect in terms of pushing women forward is just simply ennobling, enriching low-income workers, which include a disproportionate number of women. Do you think in the end the bigger gain is going to come from general economic policies or for things particularly aimed at women?
Both, absolutely both. You know, minimum salaries, yes, absolutely. Earned income tax credit, yes, absolutely. But this is not going to be sufficiently focused on women. So I think that combination of a serious and well-funded parental leave combined with, you know, money. At the end of the day, you need money. And you get your return on assets, or return on investment rather. But if you have sufficient budget to cut childcare costs or childcare centres or whatever system people resort to, reduced by half, you automatically encourage women to join the job market. So I think it's a combination of measures intended for low-income earners, but it's also specific measures that, for cultural or historical reasons, are targeted for women.
Just focus on that parental leave question, which you raised. I think only 12% of women across America get it at the moment. If Donald Trump was to do that, and you have his daughter a particular supporter of that, you know, would that be a revolutionary step in terms of what involves
I think
women?
many women would actually welcome a parental leave that would be financed properly and that would be legally prescribed. So that would certainly be a big plus.
Do you have any explanation why America is a long way behind Europe in that regard?
I think the whole. No, I mean that's a really broad question. You know, if I look back at my own country, for instance, in France, a lot of those measures and policies and programs were put in place in 1936, at a time when you know, the socialists came into power, changed the course of things. If you look at American history, the major shift that occurred was FDR. And that was a bit later on, with no clear focus on welfare benefits and social security to the same extent that it had been in many European countries. But hopefully, you know, people will get there, and health and security in that domain can become part of people's entitlement and rights.
Can I ask you a bit about corporate boards, the question of quotas? Do you think that is the one area where quotas are justified?
Yes, I do think that quotas are justified in many, many areas, but I think on boards as much as elsewhere, quotas are needed and are helpful. It is. I mean, if you look at a country like Norway, for instance, there's been a jump in women's participation on boards as of the time when quotas were put in place. In Europe now, thanks to the European directive, it is also now getting close to, or sometimes above, the 20% threshold, and that threshold will go up to 30%. So there is clearly attention paid by existing board members and by shareholders to the fact that it is better, it is more, I mean, there is now plenty of documented evidence about the fact that there is a better return on assets in those companies that have one or more than one women on the board. And it's even more true in those companies that are based on knowledge. And I think it's really important when you see how the service industry is clearly expanding in the field of knowledge use. Women are clearly contributing even more so in those sectors than in these sort of standard manufacturing sectors.
But you also probably accept that quotas is one of those words which sort of terrify people to some extent. Is there a case at all for having quotas that last for a sort of limited amount of time?
Sure. I mean, once the quotas. Look, when I joined Baker McKenzie, I thought that because I was such a brilliant lawyer, I would make partnership and I didn't need anything. But then I looked around. Well, first of all, I realized that I was not just such a bright person. But I looked around and there were so few women that if you calculate, you know, over the course of time and based on historical data, it would have taken more than 120 years before there would have been even close to parity between male and female partners. So yes, quotas are a needed step in order to reach an objective. Once the objective has been reached, then you need to reset the parameters of what you want to do, because then you want to keep people. Because any consulting firms, any particularly, I think the work has been particularly done in professional firms. You lose talented women at a particular point in time in their life because their career development and their biological cycle coincides at pretty much the time when you need to be super performing and when you're going to be super creative.
And I remember reading one. I hope so. I remember reading something about your very first job interview, where I think you were told that you would get paid less because you were a woman, or something along those lines.
No, it was worse than that, because you paid less. Okay, maybe you don't have as many diplomas. Maybe you're not as. But it was worse than that, because what I was told was, please join. You have all the credentials, all the good background, everything works fine, and we'll give you some interesting work, but don't ever expect to make partnership. And when I said, why is that? They said, because you're a woman.
But
now, maybe things have improved a bit.
But over that time, exactly. No, but what do you think has been the big gain that has happened since then, and what do you think has been the big thing that you expected to happen that hasn't?
First of all, particularly in my position as head of the International Monetary Fund, I'm always a bit cautious about passing general judgments about women and what is needed, what would help, what has failed, because it is so different whether you look at Peru or you look at Namibia or you look at the United States or you look at Sweden.
We'll just look at the West maybe, because that would be the...
So advanced economies. I think in most of these advanced economies, including Japan, and we can come back to Japan if you want, there is a clear general consensus that certain things have to be done, certain things have to not be done, certain things have to be said, certain things have not to be said. And I hope that stays that way. So there is a momentum, and there's a political force about women sharing that objective, sharing those views, and being prepared to close ranks and claim their place in the economy, their place in finance, their place in the world. So that's the positive. I think enough sort of self-awareness and probably a bit more solidarity amongst women, which was not a given in the mid-late 70s. What has not improved is very often the perception of others, and that goes to the cultural elements. You talked about Japan. In Japan, I think many women have, including his wife actually, have convinced Prime Minister Abe that it was critically important to improve the position of Japanese women, to welcome them to the workforce, to make it equal for them, to facilitate the custody, not custody, but the guardianship or the caring of their children while they were at work. Yet it is not changing massively yet. So the perception, the cultural environment, the misrepresentation, the apprehension, which is often the result of how other people perceive women, not so much how women perceive themselves, that has not changed. But speaking of how women perceive themselves, there's a lovely book by Kathy Kay and her friend about the confidence factor, which I think is still true today. And that's, I wondered why I came into this room with my notes. It's a factor of my insecurity and my lack of confidence.
I have notes too.
But then I saw that John had his.
On that subject, you talk about women closing ranks. I mean, at the moment in America, there is a very obvious counterexample. You had a woman running for president who was extremely well qualified. You had a man running against her who had, let's put it this way, less qualifications on the face of it. And on top of it,
he wasn't a woman, that's for
exactly. But on top of that, he'd also been caught, I think, saying things which most people would interpret as misogynist. And yet, most white women voted for Donald Trump. What does that tell you about that sort of idea of women in power?
Well, I would hope that, irrespective of what happened in the past, that respect, dignity, elegance in dealing with people, not in the way people are wearing clothes, would prevail over low instinct and disparaging comments.
But all the same, it does seem to put it this way, maybe misogyny doesn't matter as much as some people say.
I hope not.
Maybe but on Donald Trump to revitalise his
And
reputation.
I hope not, and I think that it is each and every one of us responsibility to make sure that it is not.
But
And
do you-
it's more of a human dignity issue than a female issue.
What about the issue, just on staying on Donald Trump for just a second, you know, we've said these bad things
My
about
comments
him.
were not addressed to him. My comments are general because there are many corners of the world where women are suffering an attitude which puts them in a lower position or in a subordinated situation or in a state of dependency and humiliation which is unacceptable.
Yes. On the issue of Trump again, we talked a bit about parental leave and what he could do there.
Yeah.
Are there other things where, despite some of the things he said in the past, where he could sort of, I suppose, reverse that reputation?
Well, you know, when I hear the words inclusive, I listen very carefully because inclusive means inclusive growth, means inclusive finance, means opening up to all, making sure that there are opportunities for all. And if that is the intention, then I think that is important for women and for those who are and have been excluded. So that is, you know, parental leave is one. As I said, the earned income tax credit at the lower end of the income range. I think inclusive finance is a critically important thing. There are 60 million American people today who are either underbanked or not banked at all because they have no access to finance. So those are really good propositions. If they can be delivered upon, that certainly would make a difference, including for women.
I'll just stretch the thing slightly broader on the issue of the economy.
But your parental leave ideas is a very
that would
important.
be a big thing. Would that
Yeah.
conceivably make Trump a better president for women than Obama was?
Oh, come on. We're not in that sort of.
It's always worth trying. There's only a small group of people here. Stretch it more broadly on Trump and the economy. Many of us have sat there saying, look, the world has got to change from relying on central banks. Governments have got to start doing things. Look at what Donald Trump is talking about. He's talking about spending money on infrastructure. He's talking about pumping money into the economy. Is it possible that that's another area where he could surprise on the upside? Are you optimistic about what you see he's doing so far?
Well, I would preface any comment with, you know, we're a bit lost in conjecture for the moment because there are certain things that are coming back, whether it's the spending on infrastructure, whether it's the tax reform. There are things that we hear that are hinted more than affirmed, such as the trade policies. So it's very premature to sort of draw conclusions at the moment. But we have consistently said that the tax system in this country needs to be reformed, needs to be simplified, that corporate tax needs to be lowered and tax loopholes eliminated. That at the lower end of the income range, less taxation would be extremely beneficial for growth. So on the tax front, if what we hear is heading in that direction, this is beneficial on two fronts. One, on growth, because it would certainly boost growth, and it's also beneficial on the risk of a very divided society with the elite of the haves and the elites and the others, the have not. But it's a question of how that tax reform is designed, okay, and how many jobs are created as a result. Second area where, you know, is the beginning of proposals are also welcome is in the area of infrastructure. Infrastructure is badly needed in this country, whether it's, you know, port, roads, railroads, airports. There has been reduced public spending on even the maintenance of what exists. So this is needed. How it will be financed, whether it will be public funding, whether it will be incentives to the private sector, is also going to matter in terms of output. So in the short term, if you only take those two those two blocks of proposals, it's rather positive for the United States. But it needs to be factored into a longer term proposition. And clearly with entitlements kicking in 2021 or so, with baby boomers retiring, with interest rates likely to rise, and certainly interest repayment rising at around the same time. The decisions that are made today, to the extent that they possibly increase inflation, that they make financing more expensive, that they strengthen the dollar, all of that is going to also have an effect.
Do you see a stronger dollar as just? Do you see a stronger dollar as just a given over the next few years?
It's very likely. If those policies are implemented, it's very likely, and it will have both good. Well, it will have downside and upside consequences.
What about the obvious? If that is the obvious good thing about Trump, from your perspective, presumably the worry is trade, and especially the idea of maybe a trade war with China or any of those particular. Recently, there have been somewhat more clement noises about that. Do you think that's a fair reading?
Well, the more moderate approach to trade is probably predicated on the fact that trade has been beneficial, and has been beneficial not just for the 100 millions of people who have been taken out of poverty around the world, particularly in Asia, but around the world, but has also been beneficial in terms of improved competition, better allocation of the factors of production, including capital, certainly lower prices for consumers in the advanced economies, which have generally benefited, in particular, people at the low income level.
What about the issue?
So when you realize all that, you sort of consider whether trade is not actually a reasonably good thing, but, and that's where I would be very interested also to hear what will be, it needs to be associated with clear measures that will benefit people who have been left out. So, because if you combine international trade and the massive increase that we've had in the last 30 years, the technology improvements, and it's very difficult to dissociate the effects of one versus the others, but they are combined. And they've created pockets of unemployment, people completely left out of their jobs, factories that have closed, and regions that have been devastated. That needs to be addressed. It cannot just be about trade is great, cheaper products, more consumption, better allocation of the factors of production. It needs to be trade that benefits all. And for the moment, that second part, which is addressing the issues of dislocation of supply chains, people displaced, people out of their jobs and out of any training, that is
surely the
critically
problem there
important.
is that trade doesn't benefit all. It benefits different people in different ways. It benefits, as you pointed out, lots of poor consumers in America, but there will also be people who are obviously hit by it and are frightened about it, and they are the people who voted for Donald Trump and for Brexit.
And there are generally those people who have either lost their job, or whose job is not paying them so much anymore, or whose children are not going to get a job in the same vicinity as where their parents have been because of change in the supply, in the manufacturing supply chain, because of the fact that it's a lot cheaper to produce elsewhere than in such or such state in the United States. And that's where a particular effort needs to be put in place. By way of social safety net, by way of minimum salary, by way of, as I said, earned income tax credit, and a focus on, okay, you've lost your job, but there are other jobs that are coming up. The US economy is constantly creating lots of jobs. Question is, how can they be helped towards these jobs in a more efficient way than has been tried so far?
The particular thing with China is always this issue about whether the yuan whether renminbi has been held down. And I think the IMF generally has tended to say that China is not a currency manipulator. Are you still in that position?
You know, we evaluate the status of a currency relative to its economy on an annual basis, every year. With most economies of the world, we determine whether it is underappreciated, overappreciated, or generally, or we say broadly, in line with the fundamentals. On China, the latest was in Article 4 back in June or July, and at that time, the renminbi was broadly in line with fundamentals. After having been probably held up for a period of time, more than was required by the economy. Now, clearly, in the last few weeks, the renminbi has depreciated because the Chinese authorities and the banking authorities in particular are now aligning the determination of their currency relative to a basket of currencies. And when the dollar appreciates, which is one of the components in the basket, clearly other currencies around the world, including the renminbi, are declining because it's a zero-sum game. When one goes up, others go down.
Shall we return to the continent from which we both came? The joys of the Italian referendum. How frightened are you by that? Is that you have lived through several versions of the euro crisis. If Renzi were to lose, particularly lose badly, would that spark off another round of it?
You know, we tend to look at the Italian economy irrespective of what the outcome of the referendum is. I mean, so far we've really experienced polls, forecast, absolutely determined view as to what the outcome will be, and we've seen how wrong we were. So we look at the Italian economy independently and irrespective of the outcome of the referendum and Matteo Renzi's decision to stay as president of the council or not. And a lot needs to be done on the Italian economy, irrespective of the referendum. Even if there is a yes vote and the Italian Senate is sort of power reduced, a lot needs to be done on the banking sector, as we know. Recapitalization is needed, strengthening of the books by elimination and dealing with the non-performing loans that are stuck in some of these banks. A lot needs to be done on the productivity front, which has not improved by far. So the Italian economy needs a lot of reforms, and
there's another large country just above Italy where you might say that has needed a lot of reforms. You've now had the removal of Sarkozy, of Juppé, of Hollande has now gone. This new generation of people coming in. Do you think that France is more likely to be reformed now? You famously worked with François Fillon.
Well, we at the IMF,
even the French people,
we certainly view France as a country that needs to continue seriously in-depth reforms of its economy. And whoever is elected comes next May will have to tackle head-on the need for structural reforms. The labour market has begun a reform, but it needs to be faster and deeper. Product markets have begun to reform a little bit, in the bus sector. Okay, great, but we need a bit more than that. That economy needs more than that. And it has the benefit of this accommodating monetary policy by the ECB, which presumably is going to continue for a while. The price of oil is still low, even at around 50, which is maybe where it will hang for the next few months. The euro is, 105, 106 to the dollar. It's not bad when you're an exporting country, and you buy oil at a reasonably low price per barrel. So the whole scenery, the whole landscape should be really favorable to those structural reforms and a limited use of fiscal space, because fiscal space can only be used appropriately to support the structural reforms. It cannot be an invitation to just increase public spending. There's plenty of public spending in France at the moment, so it needs to be rejigged, reorganized, and reshaped, which is being talked about.
I saw a cover of Libération the other day which showed François Fillon
with a wig,
converted into Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah.
Is he a big enough personality, in your view, to be the Margaret Thatcher of France?
What I know of him is that he's certainly a determined reformist. He's also fiscally prudent. But I've seen him I've worked with him for 4 years, and he's certainly very lucid in terms of the diagnosis about the French economy. He's the one who, 3 months in the job as Prime Minister, said, I'm the prime minister of a bankrupt country, which didn't please very much the president then.
He's now running against a man who described France as Cuba without the sunshine.
That's right. That's right. Well, they might. They will have to compare holiday destinations together.
We've probably done enough bashing of France. There's another country even further to the north of that,
No,
which
but
is
there's-
trying to
hey,
leave.
hang on. I'm not bashing my country. No.
But you have often said before that reform there is far too slow, and you're now saying that there is a chance of it changing.
Yes, I should think so. And you know, when I joined the government as finance minister, with Prime Minister, with François Fillon as Prime Minister, our goal, our determination was to reform. And unfortunately, the financial crisis just came to hit us 6 months in the job, and we had to back up and go about rescuing the financial sector and trying to calm depositors and make sure that the economy would not contract too much as opposed to what we were preparing to do.
I mean, in the name of fairness, I was going to go up to Britain. You have this continual...
Well, that's your country.
Exactly. No. Here's your chance to bash Britain. That you look at Britain, is that now, in your mind, is it moving a little bit away from hard Brexit to soft Brexit? They're suddenly making more conciliatory noises, or is it still going to be a very short negotiation where the British walk in and say they want access to the single market and the ability to control their immigration, and the Europeans say that's an either-or, you have to make a choice?
You know, all the noises, all the comments, all the little posturing here and there seem to indicate that we are still looking at a hard Brexit. And it's, our hope at the IMF is that the uncertainty is cleared, because that's the first factor that is really for the moment questioning investment decisions. I know that there are numbers that seem to indicate that there is still investment, there is still movements, but when you talk to people, they are really concerned about what the outcome will be. I think in the financial sector, a lot of clarity would help, because the financial passports that banks located on the British territory, and I should say the English, should I say British or English? I never know.
British, it's
British. That exclude Ireland as part of the EU, which it is as an independent country. But those banks on British territory will want to know, and their shareholders will want to know, whether or not there is a passport to continue to act in the rest of Europe.
Do you think the kind of two-year deadline, Mrs May goes and invokes Article 50, and then it takes 2 years, that's really becoming, it's going to take longer than 2 years? We had Enda Kenny, the Irish Prime Minister, this morning, he was saying that.
Yeah, most people who are close to the preparation, and on both sides they are preparing and they are trying to move along the curve, they are all saying that it's going to take longer than 2 years. I mean, when you look, it's going to be something like 60 different bilateral trade treaty that will have to be negotiated, if only that to begin with. And then you have to disentangle the system. And I hear what is being said, which will be, okay, well, let's keep it as it is, and we will gradually remove what we don't like. I don't think it's going to be
You can't. So the British can't cherry pick what they would like from Europe.
But it's a negotiation. You have two parties, and I don't want to opine as to who is in the strongest position, but I'm not sure.
Can I ask one last question? I think I get the message. There's one last question to do with globalization. If you think of all the things we've spoken about today, we talked about trade with China and America, we talked about Europe. At one time, the whole future of trade, very much tied up with the IMF, very much tied up with what you think about, was towards these big global trade deals. Now you see Trump trying to do things on a bilateral basis. You've talked about Britain having to do bilateral deals. Is there an element of deglobalization beginning to happen, or do you think there's a way through with all these little deals?
I certainly hope that there is not a move towards deglobalization. I equally think that we have to move towards globalization that has a different face, and which is not excluding people along the way as it proceeds towards increasing or improving the development of those developing countries of, say, Africa and some of the Asian world, and moving up for the emerging market economies. So I hope it's not deglobalization. I hope it's a different globalization, from a purely institutional point of view, I would hope that the WTO continues to do the hard work that is required to have a framework within which, other arrangements can be had. But it's clearly it's clearly taking a different form, and the Bali Agreement has not yet been ratified. The Doha Agreement is a bit of the story of the past now. So a new framework has to be invented, and I hope that it can be proposed in sufficiently attractive way that are compatible with regional or bilateral agreements as well, which is clearly the road that it's taking. My IMF colleague are probably terribly upset with me because I'm supposed to say that a global deal is better than a lot of bilateral deals, and the spaghetti ball is not desirable. But I think that's.
You just want one flat pizza instead.
No, I think a bit like in Europe, you have the subsidiarity principle, and I'm not suggesting that the global trade should be operated a la Brussels, but I think that having a general framework which does not necessarily goes into the details, but is compatible with bilateral arrangements that can be negotiated or regional arrangements that can be negotiated. Might be a way for the future.
Well, that's something to hope for. Christine Lagarde, thank you for talking to Bloomberg Television.
Thank you.
Thank you. We will now throw it open to questions. That was the end of the televised bit, where Christine will now. I will invite people from the audience to stand up and ask questions. There's a lady there. Just going.
Thank you. The IMF takes climate change risk into account in its forecasts. I'm wondering, with the changes we might see under this new presidency, perhaps with fossil fuel subsidies, how that changes some of your forecasts, and I guess also a larger picture, how that may change our ability to meet the Paris Agreement 2-degree scenario.
We tend not to do multiple year forecast. We generally forecast ongoing year, following year, and the next 2 following years. We don't go beyond that. So we're not going to change that. Second, around the world, we are encouraging countries to remove fossil fuel subsidies. And we have done that quite successfully. Well, we have advised, and countries have listened and taken advantage of the low oil price environment in order to remove subsidies, and for some of them, not all, to actually put in place a mechanism that will actually stay irrespective of the oil price variations, which is critically important. It's not just about removing subsidies, it's about making sure that even if the price of oil was going to hit, the 60, 70, if it was to do that, subsidies would continue to be out of the picture. So this is our position. We don't think that it is an intelligent use of public funding. We think that public funding can be redirected, much better targeted to benefit people, particularly those in need. And our view is not changing in that respect. Now, COP22, Marrakesh, there was clearly, as I understand it from my team that went over there, there is a determination, irrespective of variations here, changes there, to just keep at it and make sure that all the commitments that have been made by countries are delivered upon, and that contributions are checked in 2018, 2020, and so on and so forth. So I hope that there is and there will be clarity on that front.
Tom Keane from Bloomberg News.
I thought, John, that for Bloomberg News, when Madame Lagarde mentioned the spaghetti bowl, that was something about the Italian vote. I can go deeper into that later. This has been wonderful.
Tom, it's not the Italian vote, actually. It's a very solid Indian economist who has commented extensively on international trade, and who, he's famous in trade circles to have argued that a spaghetti ball is not something that the world needs, but something that is far more organized under one single operation,
Right.
which is called the Doha round. Now, unfortunately,
That
that didn't really happen either.
did not really happen. Let me tie the threads together of what we've heard today: diversity, politics, international economics, and with your great research, which has been the hallmark of your tenure, the slow economic growth that we've seen. And what I would point out, particularly linking diversity into all that you do each day, it's almost a battle against a new conservatism that no one in this room really understands. We're living it in real time. And part of that new conservatism is a zero-sum society, economically, neo-mercantilism, however you want to put it. How would you suggest all of us, and institutions in particular, fight back against what we know always will fail, which is a zero-sum society?
Easy question.
You know, Tom, when in despair, and it happens to all of us, I tend to rely on the woman's factor. And whenever you're in your position, you can encourage, support, push, emulate, coach, support women. It will not be a zero-sum society. It will be more than that.
But all the same, Christine, very quickly to follow up on, there is, we were all brought up in a kind of liberal tradition of this is liberal in the correct English version of liberal, not the debauched American, not the debauched American version. But we were all brought up in the liberal tradition of, here is global capitalism, here is liberal democracy, the end of history, whatever you want to call it. And what Tom is saying is that there is now a reaction against that around the world. And why isn't liberalism better able to make the case the other way?
No, I think I understood his question.
Yeah. But still not rushing to answer it. There's a lady. There's a lady there. Sorry.
No, you know what? Because you're poking me here. I really think that we have to make the case for the opening of barriers and the removal of barriers, for the movement of goods and for the free movement of people, and for the movement of capitals across borders. I don't think that walls are there to stay when it comes to goods, services, capitals, and people. And that, what we need to do is to actually advocate what has worked, what have been the benefits, and what maybe has been forgotten along the way, and what we have not focused on, and what needs to be done. And that will require funding, intelligent focus on the right vocational schools, on the right training, on the right geography-specific areas that are taking the hit. So I think that we need to do, and it cannot be about, oh, let's have a sort of big stimulus package that will cut across all countries in the world and hope for the better, and that it will not be low mediocre for too long. I think, if anything, we're learning that measures have spillover effects everywhere, and measures funding specific programs have to be extremely, not only country tailored, but they have to be very region specific.
Thank you. I really appreciate those comments. My name is Eve Ellis, and I'm in wealth management at Morgan Stanley. And I wanted to go back to your comments about quotas on boards, because I run a specific portfolio called the Gender Parity Portfolio, where we only invest in companies that meet our financial criteria and have a minimum of 3 women on their boards. And when you were talking about quotas, given that this country seems so afraid of that word, I'm wondering what you would suggest we could do to get to quotas, so that we do have more women on boards. And what I'm talking about is parity, meaning 50%, not 20, 30 moving there. So what would you suggest that we do?
If the word is an issue, change the word. And we can turn to John or to any Latinist, actually, to find us something that will be equal to quota and will not have that sort of loaded aspect to it. You know, I'm glad you're asking the question on quota, because we at the IMF we also have the 50% target, and we are at 44.1 or something like that, and gradually, laboriously moving to 50%. But that's not enough, or we've decided a few years back that it was not enough, because you need to be, and I'm sure you are, far more granular than that. So we have quotas by categories of employment. And surprise, surprise, at the lower end, in terms of income and responsibilities, we've far exceeded the 50%. But at the higher end, in the economist category, which is a sort of royal path as far as the IMF is concerned, we are a little bit north of 25%. So I think to do it by categories, segmenting and sort of disaggregating your workforce is something that is really needed, helpful. It's painful. I would love to brag about my 44%, but my teams say, up there, 25%. In your management group, it's only about 20%. Well, we're at 25 now, I think. And in the closed circle of the management committee, it's also only 20%. So that's where we need to focus and where we need to want to deliver and to perform. Can I ask you a question? Relative to other portfolios, is your portfolio more? If you don't want to answer, don't answer. But are you performing better? Are you delivering better results? Okay. Well done. But you know what? I think you need to say that, because it's going to bring a smile on some people's face. I know some men who will say, "Oh, yeah," but say it.
Angela Sun from Bloomberg. Thank you very much, Madame Lagarde, for your very important words today. I wanted to ask you how you are taking into account gender concerns in the way you design your programs in standard setting as well as implementation at the IMF. And then also, how do you maintain accountability among your member economies?
Great question. It's the issue of gender and women's contribution to the economy is something that we have begun looking at seriously about 4 years ago. We're just about to publish a book called Women in Economics, and it includes a lot of the very detailed studies that have been conducted in the last 4 years, and I'm just delighted that members of my team here are supporting this. But it's not been an easy task. Traditionally, the IMF is known to be focusing on macroeconomic factors, and that would typically be fiscal, monetary, few structural reforms, typically associated with the conditionalities that we put into our programs when we have to lend to a country. So moving into the impact of climate change, the contribution of women to the economy, the inequalities and the relation between inequalities and sustainable growth has been a bit of a task. I think we're there now. We're there in terms of the research that Tom celebrated earlier on. Thank you, Tom, for that. But that's not enough, again. We need to push the envelope a bit further. And we need to make sure that in the Article 4, which is the annual surveillance exercise that we do with every country, we also factor that in. So the board has tolerated that we did that, provided that the women's factor is macro-critical, and provided that countries actually volunteer. So we have about 14 pilot countries that have volunteered to include women's contribution to the economy at all layers, labor, finance, access to all sorts of responsibilities, have accepted to include that, and we do include it in the Article 4, and sometimes as a special issue that we do at the end of each Article 4. For the first time as well, we are really focusing on that with 2 program countries, and I can mention them because they are public. One is Jordan, and the second one is Egypt. Now, we cannot say in a program, because we want to support women, this and this conditionalities will apply, or this prior actions will be needed. but we try to analyze with other people's support, because we're not the experts in violence against women and the difficult access of women to their workplace, which is a big issue. But when we hear that from experts, and they're telling us consistently that this is a major issue, we discuss in partnership with the authorities, and they are generally, in most cases, willing to listen and to take measures. Significant investment in infrastructure focused on transportation with a security component about it. That's an example of what we're doing. And we will continue to do that.
There's a lady there. We'll just...
Melissa James from Morgan Stanley, and thank you very much for your comments this afternoon. I'm curious to know, the president-elect has said very little about his policies with respect to education. And as you talked earlier about just how we maintain job growth and labor force participation as the economy transforms from being a manufacturing to a service to ultimately a technology-driven economy, would be interested to hear your thoughts on what needs to be done with respect to education in the developed world, particularly in the U.S., in your opinion, to ensure that we can have good economic growth and not at the expense of globalization.
When I'm out of my depth, I say so, and I would say so on that one, because I'm not an expert in education. The only thing that we see from the study and the research that we do at the IMF is that education is crucial in order not only to empower women, but also in order to deal with demographic instability. You see a very clear correlation between the level of education and the fertility rate in many of the developing countries. So if only for these two reasons, investing in education is critically important, particularly investing in education of girls. Now, it's common sense, and I'm sure that many in the room share this common sense. With significant technological changes, whether you look at artificial intelligence, whether you look at 3D printings, whether you look at the biotech revolutions that are taking place, education and constant education throughout people's life is necessary. Now, how that is organized, how that is financed, how much of it is publicly funded, those are, societal choices that countries have to make and that voters have to endorse and support. But the critical contribution of education is certainly obvious in both advanced and particularly in the developing and emerging economies. So I'm sorry not to offer, is the German vocational system better than the sort of much more mercurial way of teaching that you experience in a country like France or Italy? Is I don't know how you call the equivalent of the vocational system here in this country, the charter
schools or
community college. Is that working? How does it work? What I know from my experience as a finance minister and trying to take a bit of an interest as to what return we were getting on our investment in education is that it cannot be just a national policy. It has to really drill down to the complexities of employment locations, of geographic areas as well.
And one question here. In the name of diversity, we have to go to this side of the room.
Daniel Moss, Bloomberg News. I want to build on Tom's question about your research. Every April and every October you release the WEO. Now, it just seems we're stuck in this 2 to 3% world. About 2% for the developed economies, about 3% for the rest. WEO after WEO after WEO. Your colleague Stephen Poloz has called this the tyranny of serial disappointment. I'm sure you've heard him say that. Can you foresee anything that breaks us out of this 2 to 3% world?
I've called it the low mediocre, or the new mediocre rather, which is, it's been too low for too long and benefiting too few. And what we are suggesting in terms of policy mix at the moment is what we've called the three-prong approach, which is a combination of decisive structural reforms, use of fiscal space when it is available, and accommodative monetary policy by the central banks of the advanced economies predominantly. And my comments are really directed to the advanced economies, because the developing world and the emerging market economies are a different story. So we believe that if this three-pronged approach is decisively adopted by all policymakers in those advanced economies, and there is value in all of them doing it at the same time, not the same recipe exactly, because it has to be adjusted to the country's specificity, and not everybody has fiscal space. We believe that that should take us out of this sort of three-ish global growth that we are seeing at the moment, where everything is too low except unemployment.
Do you see anything that's going to get us to where you want to be based on those prescriptions?
Well, I think there are measures that are either announced or being taken that will probably take us further. The real question and the real concern that we have is, what is the quality of those measures? If you look at, for instance, a proposed stimulus package in China, for instance, that would focus on stimulating credit, yet again, for more investment in certain provinces that are already in a bit of an overdrive when it comes to investment. That will push the growth numbers. But is it going to be sustainable? Is it going to be the quality of growth that the Chinese authorities advocate and want? Question mark. We have doubts. In the same vein, if some countries decide on the basis of that three-pronged approach that many have now internalized, that they can go fiscal, no problem. We are north of 4% fiscal deficit. That's okay. The IMF says that we should use fiscal space. This is not what we're saying. We're saying that the three have to come together, and that use of fiscal space when there is no such fiscal space, or very little, without the structural reforms, is not going to change qualitatively and durably the state of the global economy.
Christine, all interviewers are used, Tom would no doubt back this up, used to the tyranny of serial disappointment.
Yeah.
You've been extremely kind and with your time. Thank you very, very much for coming to Bloomberg.
Thank you.
I think we've probably...
Well, pick me up with golden hand. Oh, me say, oh, me tell you to run. On my way. Nobody say, nobody on. Well, I would like to hold my little hand. How we will run with, how we will cry with. I would like to hold my little hand. How we will run with. Reach out my hand, oh me say, oh me tell you to run. On my way, on my way. Mama say, mama say,
There's a place I go to when no one knows me. It's not lonely, it's a necessary thing. It's a place I made up, find out what I made of. The nights I've stayed up, counting stars and fighting sleep. Let it wash over me, I'm ready to lose my feet. Take me off to the place where one reviews life's mystery. Steady on down the line, lose every sense of time. Take it all in and wake up that small part of me. Day to day I'm blind to see and find how far to go. Everybody got their reason, everybody got their way. We're just catching and releasing what builds up throughout the day. It gets into your body and it flows right through your blood. We can tell each other secrets and remember how to love. Da-da-dum, da-dum, dum, dum. Da-dum, dum, dum. Da-dum, dum. Da-da-dum, da-dum, dum, dum. Da-dum, dum, dum. Da-dum, dum. There's a place I'm going, no one knows me. If I breathe real slow, let it out and let it in. It can be terrifying to be slowly dying, also clarifying. We end where we begin, so let it wash over me. I'm ready to lose my feet. Take me off to the place where one reveals life's mystery. Steady on down the line, lose every sense of time. Take it all in and wake up that small part of me. Day to day I'm blind to see and find how far to go. Everybody got their reason, everybody got their way. We're just catching and releasing what builds up throughout the day. And it gets into your body, flows right through your blood. We can tell each other secrets and remember how to love. Da-da-dum, da-dum, dum, dum. Da-dum, dum, dum. Da-dum, dum. Da-da-dum, da-dum, dum, dum. Da-dum, dum, dum. Da-dum.